The scout's name was Bren, and he came in over the Stormful Pass with 3 cracked ribs and a fever that had been climbing since the previous dawn. My men brought him to the fire, and I knelt to look at him the way I look at any man who has ridden hard in service of this kingdom, with attention and without ceremony. I was pulling the riding cloak from his shoulders when the smell hit me. Not his scent, hers. 7 years is a long time, and I had spent considerable portions of it wondering if I had constructed her out of grief, if memory had smoothed and shaped her into something no real person could be. Standing in the fire-lit corridor of Drevholt's eastern garrison with a half-delirious scout's cloak in my hands, I understood that I had not constructed anything. The scent was specific, wood smoke and something green, like the first growth after a hard frost, and underneath it a steadiness that had no name in any language I had been taught. My wolf went from sleeping to standing in less than a breath, and did not make a sound, which was how I knew this was real. I set the cloak down carefully. I asked Bren when he could speak where he had sheltered. "A village," he said, his voice rough with the fever. "Kerwick, small. There is a woman there who keeps a kind of way station, takes in anyone who comes over the pass in bad condition. She gave me the cloak because mine was soaked through, said it was an old one she didn't need." I was already standing. "Kerwick," I said. "My lord, it is 7 days north at this season." "I know how far it is." I had, in point of fact, known the location of every settlement within 4 days of Stormful Pass for the last 3 years. What I had not had, in 3 years of knowing, was a reason specific enough to ride in winter. A scent on a borrowed cloak was specific enough. I left Bren to the garrison physician, chose 6 riders I trusted with my life and more relevant with their silence, and gave the order before the fire had cooled. My second in command, Gareth, fell into step beside me without being asked. "You found something," he said. It was not a question. "I've found a direction," I told him. "I'll know what it is when I get there." He did not push further. This is why I trust him. I should tell you, since this story cannot be understood without it, what happened 7 years ago. Maren came to Drevholt as a ward when she was 19. Not by blood connection to any great house, but by the arrangement of her guardian, a minor court administrator named Tolan, who had served the crown in small ways for 30 years, and called in that service when he died, leaving a young woman with no family and no resources, and a letter of introduction that my father's steward had honored out of courtesy. She arrived with 2 trunks, a composure that I noticed immediately and then told myself I had not noticed, and the look of someone who has decided not to ask for more than she is given because she has learned, at some cost, that the asking does not always go well. She was not a ward in the romantic sense of the word. She had a room in the eastern wing. She was employed in the library and occasionally in the record-keeping office. She was not presented at any ceremony, not invited to the great hall table, not treated as a person of consequence by anyone in my council, who were at that time still operating under my father's system of assigning worth by bloodline and territorial holding. By those measures, Maren registered as nothing at all. By my measures, she was the most interesting person I had encountered in my own court in a decade. I watched her for 2 years, the way you watch something you are not sure you have the right to want. She was careful with people. Not cautious in the fearful sense, careful in the sense of someone who understands that attention costs the person receiving it, and so gives it deliberately, and does not waste it. She remembered things about the people she spoke with. She asked questions that suggested she had been thinking about them since their last conversation. In the library she worked quickly and well, and she had a habit, when she found something unexpected in the records, of pressing her fingertip to the page as if to make sure it stayed there while she thought. My wolf had been still around every woman my counsel proposed. Around Maren he was simply awake, not clamoring, not dramatic, just present and paying attention, which is, I have come to understand, how he communicates the things he is certain of. I had not yet told her any of this. I was, at that time, still operating under the misapprehension that I needed to find the correct moment, which is what men tell themselves when they are afraid of being wrong. Then the council convened. Councillor Davin, who was the eldest and whose influence in those years I had not yet fully understood or countered, brought a proposal in the formal session. A territorial alliance sealed through an arrangement with the daughter of the northern Lord Edrath, a woman named Svi whom I had met twice, and who had given no indication of finding me any more interesting than I found her. The proposal was not unusual by the council's logic. I was 31. I had no mate. The kingdom's northern border had been a source of friction for 6 years. The match resolved 2 problems with one arrangement, and the council had already drafted the initial correspondence. I sat through the presentation. I asked 3 questions, all procedural. I said I would consider it. What I did not say, and this is the error I carry, was that I was already decided, and not in the direction Councillor Davin intended, and that I intended to speak to Marin before the day was out. That night, something went wrong in the chain of information between my silence and the corridor, where Marin overheard 2 of the council's junior members discussing the arrangement as if it were already agreed. I know this now. I did not know it that night, because by the time I went to find her the following morning, she was gone. Not gone. Her room cleared, her 2 trunks absent, a brief letter left with the steward thanking the crown for its courtesy and wishing the household well. It said nothing else. It asked for nothing. It had the handwriting of someone who had written it quickly and had not allowed herself to revise it. I dissolved the Edrath arrangement that same afternoon. I sent riders after her before the morning was done. The riders came back without her. She had, it emerged, a quality for moving through the world without leaving a trail that wanted to be followed, which I could only respect even as it cost me. The council for the next 2 years advised me to let the matter rest. I explained, with the patience I was still developing at that point, that I was not going to do that. By year 3, I had largely stopped explaining and simply continued searching, which is a more efficient use of everyone's time. By year 7, I had covered every region of the kingdom except the deep north, which I had been working systematically and slowly, because the north is large and ungenerous with its information. 3 years of knowing Kerwick existed. 1 winter's day and a borrowed cloak, and a scent on a cold corridor floor. I rode for 7 days. Stormful Pass in the deep of winter is not a landscape that welcomes inspection. The wind comes off the high peaks with a directness that suggests it has somewhere better to be, and the road, such as it is, disappears under snow for long stretches and requires the kind of navigation that is more instinct than observation. My 6 riders are all northerners by birth. They did not complain. They did watch me, with the particular attention that good soldiers give to a commander who is not behaving entirely like himself, and they did not comment on it, which is their very great professional virtue. I thought about Marin for 7 days. This was not unusual. I had been thinking about Marin for 7 years, but the quality of the thinking changed as the distance shortened. For 7 years the thinking had been a form of planning, a kind of necessary forward motion. Where might she be? What route would she have taken? Who might have known her? What records might carry a trace? Now the planning was done, or done enough, and what remained was something more like the feeling you get when a door you have been pressing against for a very long time finally, almost imperceptibly, begins to shift. I had not let myself consider what she might be like now. The Marin I carried in my memory was 21, quiet-eyed, careful with her attention. 7 years is not nothing. People are not preserved by distance. Whatever she had become in 7 years of building a life in the northern passes, she would not be the same woman I had watched in the library, pressing her finger to pages as if to keep them still. I found, as Kerwick came into view on the 7th afternoon, that I was glad of this. Whatever she was now, she had made herself. That seemed to me the truest expression of the worth I had always seen, and her counsel had never bothered to look for. Kerwick is small. 12 buildings, perhaps 15, clustered at the foot of the eastern wall of the pass, where the wind drops slightly and the snow settles into something navigable. The way station is easy to identify. It is the building with the most light in the windows and a stack of firewood that suggests someone who takes hospitality seriously and plans accordingly. I left my riders at the edge of the village. They did not need to be told to stay back. Gareth gave me a look that communicated, without words, that he would wait as long as necessary and not mention the matter to anyone. I walked to the door and knocked. She opened it herself. She was not what I remembered, she was more. Not in any dramatic sense, she had not transformed into something mythological. She had simply become more entirely herself, which is a kind of transformation that does not announce itself but is recognizable immediately to anyone paying attention. Her hair was shorter. There were new lines at the corners of her eyes, and she wore them without apology. Her expression when she saw me did through several things in rapid succession: recognition, something sharp, and then the careful composure I remembered, settling over everything like water finding its level. She said, "Aldrich." "Not my lord, not your grace, my name." My wolf, who had been at careful attention for 7 days, went very still. "Marin," I said. We stood like that for a moment, her in the doorway, me in the snow, the wind doing its indifferent work around us, and then she stepped back and held the door open. "Come in," she said. "I'll ask my guests to give us the room." The way station's main room held 4 people, a family of 3 who had been caught at the pass when the last storm came in, and an older man who looked like a trader and was sleeping by the fire with the focused commitment of someone who had not slept in several days. Marin spoke to the family quietly, and they moved without fuss to the back room. She covered the trader with an extra blanket without waking him, and then she stood by the fire and looked at me and waited. This was the moment I had been building toward for 7 years. I had imagined versions of it in the way that you do in weak moments, when the searching has been long and the results limited. I had imagined her relief and her anger and everything between. What I had not quite imagined was this: her stillness. The way she stood and did not fidget and did not reach for words, simply waited for me to say what I had come to say, with the patience of someone who has learned to take the world at its own speed. I noticed then that the mark on my wrist was glowing. Not brightly, it does not announce itself like that. A warmth and a light low enough that you would miss it if you were not looking. I looked at her wrist, the same warmth, the same light. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then Marin looked from her wrist to my face, and what passed across her expression was not surprise exactly, more the look of someone who has suspected something for a long time and is now faced with the confirmation of it, and must decide what to do with that. "How long?" she said. "Since I first saw you in the library," I said, though I did not know what I was looking at the time. "How long since you knew?" "Since the morning after the council proposed the Edrath arrangement. Since I went to find you and found your room empty." She was quiet. The fire shifted. Outside, the wind moved through Kerwick's narrow spaces with its customary indifference. "I thought you had agreed to it," she said. "I heard Davin's men speaking in the corridor. They spoke as though it was settled." "It was never settled," I said. "I dissolved it before the day was out. The arrangement never went forward." Her jaw tightened slightly. Not at me, I recognized the expression. It is what her face does when she is containing something that deserves considerably more room than she is giving it. 7 years, she said. 7 years. You could have sent a formal message. I sent 12, I said. You moved frequently in the first 2 years. A small pause. I was careful, she said. I know, I respected it, even when I found it inconvenient. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, too serious for that, but something in the same direction. She looked at the mark on her wrist again. "It appeared when you arrived," she said. "I felt it before I saw you, the warmth. I thought something had changed with the fire." "It appeared for me in a garrison corridor 7 days ago," I said, "when a scout came in wearing your borrowed cloak." She looked at me then, and I held her gaze, and the thing that passed between us was not dramatic and not performed. It was simply recognition, the kind that has nowhere to hide and no particular need to. "I built something here," she said. "It is not nothing." "I know," I said. "I walked through your village. The people here trust you. That is not easily earned in the North. I am not going to leave it in disorder. I would not ask you to." Another pause. She was thinking, and I let her, because the habit of her thinking is one of the things I have always valued, and nothing in 7 years had made me less patient for it. "What is it you are asking then?" she said. I considered the question as she had asked it, directly and without decoration, and gave it the same. "I am asking you to come home," I said. "I am asking you to come back to Drevholt as my fated mate, my Luna, the person I should have spoken plainly to 6 years before I did not. I am asking as a man who has been wrong and knows it, and has no mechanism for undoing that except being present and asking. I am not asking you to decide this moment. I will stay in Kerwick as long as you need." The silence that followed was not empty. She moved to the window and I waited, and my wolf waited with me, and the fire did its quiet work. She turned back. "I need 3 days," she said. "There are arrangements to make here, people I am responsible for. I will not leave them unprepared." "3 days," I said. "And then I will go with you." She said it plainly, without performance. "Not because the mark tells me to, because you are still here in winter in Kerwick, 7 years later, and I believe that means something." I said it means everything. She spent 3 days making arrangements with the thoroughness you would expect of someone who had been maintaining a way station through 2 hard northern winters without much assistance. She identified a family, a couple named Farrell and their eldest daughter, who had the capability and the willingness to take it over, walked them through every procedure she had developed, wrote out the record system she had built for tracking supplies, and introduced them to every regular traveler who came through in those 3 days, making their transition the first priority before she thought about her own departure. I helped where I was useful and stayed out of the way where I was not. My riders assisted with firewood and the repair of a roof joint that had been losing ground against the snow for some time. Gareth, with characteristic practicality, organized the transfer of the way station's supply records into a format that the Farrell family found easier to navigate. By the morning of the 3rd day, what Marin had built was intact and in good hands, which was the only condition under which she was willing to leave it. On the evening of the 2nd day, she sat with me by the fire after the others had gone to sleep, and we talked for the first time without the weight of the earlier conversation pressing on us from both sides. Not about the 7 years, not yet, or not primarily, but about smaller things. The politics of Stormful Pass, which she understood better than most of my counsel. A dispute between 2 of the local families that she had been quietly mediating for the better part of a year. A book she had found in the village's small collection of salvaged texts, which had turned out to be a rare copy of a legal commentary she had recognized from the Drevholt library and read 3 times, because it was the most interesting thing available. I listened to her talk about the legal commentary and thought about the library and the way her finger had pressed the page, and understood that the thing I had carried through 7 years of searching was not a memory softened by distance, but an accurate accounting. On the morning of the 3rd day she put on her coat, which was practical and northern and entirely undecorative, picked up the single pack she had assembled, and walked out of the way station she had built from nothing into 7 years of the hardest kind of northern living, and she did not look back at it with any visible grief. She had done what she came to do. She was finished with that, and ready for the next thing. My wolf settled into something that felt, after 7 years, like arriving. We rode back through the stormful pass with the wind at our backs for the first 2 days, which Gareth noted with the air of a man recording a favorable omen for future reference. Maren rode well. She had learned in her northern years from necessity, and she did not require management or solicitousness, which my riders registered with visible approval. She asked questions about the road, about conditions further south, about what had changed in Drevholt in 7 years, and she listened to the answers with the quality of attention I recognized. On the 4th day, when the pass had given way to the broader southern road, and the temperature had risen to something a person from a warmer part of the world might describe as merely cold, she rode beside me for a stretch and said, without preamble, "Tell me about the council." I told her. All of it, not only the Edrath proposal and its dissolution, but the broader structure of how my council operated and how it had operated under my father, and what I had been doing in 7 years to reshape it, and where it still needed work. I did not soften the parts that were unflattering to my own earlier management. She listened and asked good questions, and some of the questions were the kind that indicate the person asking has already perceived something you have not quite said, which is a quality I find almost unbearably useful in a person I am going to spend my life with. At one point she said, "Councillor Davin." "Retired," I said. 2 years ago, not under duress, he was genuinely aging and I made the retirement comfortable. But I was not displeased by the timing. And the ones who spoke in the corridor. Both still serving. They were junior then and are less junior now, which means they have more to lose and are accordingly more careful. She thought about this. They should be addressed, she said, not destroyed but addressed. Yes, I said, I had been thinking the same. I wanted to speak with you first. She glanced at me. Something in her expression that I could not quite read, not surprise, but something adjacent. You waited, she said. It concerned you directly, I said. It seemed appropriate. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "That is the correct instinct." And then she said nothing more on the subject, which meant she had concluded the conversation and filed it under matters to return to later, which I recognized as a reliable indicator of how her mind worked. We arrived in Drevholt on a day when the cloud cover had broken, and the late winter sun was making its best effort over the city's stone, which gave the whole approach an aspect of ceremony that none of us had arranged, and all of us noted. The gates opened when the riders were recognized, and word moved through the courtyard with the speed that word always moves in a castle where people have been waiting for something to happen for 7 years. My household had learned in 7 years not to ask about the searching. They had also learned, by this point, how to read my bearing when I returned from a journey, and what I looked like when I had found what I was looking for was apparently readable from some distance, because by the time I rode into the courtyard, the household was assembled. I dismounted. Maren dismounted beside me, with the unhurried composure of someone who is not going to be made anxious by a courtyard of watching people, and stood beside me on the stone. I turned to face my household and my assembled riders, and I said, without elaboration, "This is Maren. She is my fated mate. She is the Luna of Drevholt." The mark on my wrist and hers was visible in the winter light, and needed no further explanation. The bowing that followed was not the dramatic orchestrated kind you see in stories. It was the quiet kind, people inclining their heads one by one, and then another, and then the whole yard. The kind that happens when recognition moves through a crowd not because someone commanded it, but because they can see, plainly, what is true. My wolf, who had been watchful for 7 days and quietly patient for 3, settled its weight for the first time without any reservation at all. I turned to Maren, and she was looking at the courtyard with the expression I had seen her use in Caerwick when she finished a task she had set herself, not triumphant, just complete, as if she had arrived at the end of a calculation and found the answer reasonable. I said quietly so only she could hear, "Welcome home." She looked at me then, and what was in her face was not simple, because she is not a simple person, and she was not going to resolve 7 years into a single expression. But underneath the complexity of it, there was something that had been absent in the doorway of the way station and was present now. Ease. The particular ease of a person who has been carrying tension for so long they had stopped noticing its weight, and is now, at last, able to set it down. "Thank you," she said, and then, after a moment, "It looks different than I remembered." "Some things are different," I said. "Most of the library is the same." Her expression moved, finally, into something that was unmistakably close to a smile. "Good," she said. There was a section on Drevholt territorial law that I never finished. The council session took place 4 days after our return, once I had given Marin time to settle and myself time to prepare the ground correctly. I had, over 7 years, become considerably better at managing my council than I had been at 31. Patience is, it turns out, its own kind of power if you are willing to wait long enough to apply it. I introduced Marin to the council formally and without apology. I named the mark which they could see. I named her role. And then, with the same absence of drama, I addressed the matter of 7 years ago. I did not name it an accusation. I described what had happened, the conversation overheard in the corridor, the information that had been allowed to travel without correction, the 7 years that had followed from that small failure of attention. I asked the 2 council members who had been present in that corridor to account for what had been said. They did, with the particular thoroughness of people who understand that they are not going to be asked twice. Marin sat through this without expression. When the accounting was finished, she said 4 things. They were precise and they were fair, and they left no ambiguity about what she expected to be different going forward. The council, I noted, listened in a way they had not listened in some years, with the full attention that people give to someone whose words they cannot afford to miss. It was not a triumph, the way stories sometimes arrange these things. It was something quieter and more durable, a correction made clearly, acknowledged without evasion and put away. The people who had failed to look at her were now looking. That was enough. That evening, after the session, I found Marin in the library. She had, true to her word, located the section on Drevholt territorial law that she had not finished 7 years earlier, and she was sitting at the table where she had always worked, with the lamp angled the way she had always angled it, and her finger pressed to the page. I stood in the doorway for a moment before she heard me. There is something in watching a person at home in a place, the specific quality of ease a person has when they are not performing anything, when they have simply arrived somewhere they intend to stay. 7 years ago I had watched this in a library where she had never quite been able to stop monitoring the edges of the room. Now the monitoring was absent. She was simply reading. She heard me then and looked up. "Anything useful?" I asked. "Very," she said. "There's a case from the Third Reign that has direct bearing on the Stormful Pass jurisdiction dispute. The ruling was never properly applied." "Then we'll apply it." She considered this. "It will require the council to revisit 3 standing agreements." "The council," I said, "is going to find that I am serious about the application of precedent." Her expression did the thing it does, not quite a smile, but in the direction of one. "Good," she said. I came into the library and sat across from her, and we worked together through the evening the way I had imagined, in the weakest moments of 7 years of searching, that we might someday work in an easy quiet, moving back and forth between concentration and conversation, the fire doing its quiet work, my wolf entirely settled for the first time in a great while. At some point late in the evening, she set the book down and looked at me with the directness she uses when she has arrived at something she intends to say plainly. "Aldrich," she said. "Yes. I am not going anywhere again." I held her gaze. The mark on my wrist was a quiet warmth, steady and undemanding. After 7 years of searching and 7 days of riding and 3 days of waiting and 4 days of returning, it was, in the end, this simple. A woman at a library table, saying plainly that she was staying. "I know," I said. She nodded once, as if that settled it, and picked up her book. Outside, the last of the winter wind moved through Drevholt's high towers and found nothing to disturb. In the library the fire burned low and steady, and my wolf, warm for the first time in 7 years, did not move at all.